Hello and welcome to that first training video. This is going to review the RAM start. Instead of doing a classic RAM start and just mentioning the steps, we're going to be mentioning a few things regarding the in-depth explanation of what's happening behind the switches you're actually turning or switching. So there we go. We're going to do the RAM start 3 sweeps as described in the Falcon manual. So the 16C Charlie Mike -1. And so yeah, we'll be reviewing that. Make sure you understand and don't forget to review the manual to check what's inside. Do things over and over so you can master that easily. And you won't be lost when it comes to multiplayer and understanding the procedure and doing that as quickly as possible, depending on the time you have left for preparing for takeoff. So let's go. The first thing we're going to do in the cockpit is preparing the lights. Usually what we want to do is switch the those two, so the position lights bright, and we're going to set that to flash, and that is already to master. We're going to leave that to master. Then we're going to review the fuel. So here we're going to set that to norm, and what does it do actually is this knob actually controls the fuel pump. And the fuel pump, when it's set to norm, is actually activating the fuel pump. So when you're in the air doing an inverted flight or putting negative G on the plane, you're going to actually maintain fuel flow in the engine. If you don't set that up to norm, a couple, let's say 10-15 minutes after you've departed and you're in flight, you might face with the first maneuver you're actually doing a flame out, which is definitely something you want to avoid. So there you go. You need to set that to normal because otherwise bad things might happen. All right, then we'll be going downwards and making sure that we've got the comms selected to backup. And one reason being that for now, the UFC, which is actually controlled by that, does not function, and you will not be able to hear anything on the uniform channel. Victor's channel will only be available once you've started a plane and you've got the DED available here. All right, so we continue the sweep, and now we go to the battery. All right, so now we switch the battery to BAT. So now we're only selecting the battery source, and we're going to do a quick test here, which is regarding the flight control systems. So right now, what it does say is that the FLCS RLI is that the flight control system is not powered by the battery and is powered by nothing right now. So as you can see, we're on standby generator, and standby generator and main generator are not working now because obviously the engine is not started. So if we set now here to test, we're switch up the test for the flight control test panel here. What it's going to say is that basically what you have here is that the takeoff is basically the aircraft battery is to flight control. So basically it says that now the battery is powering on the flight controls, but as this is a test, you're not really powering up the flight controls. So it says here that basically there's nothing powering the flight controls right now, which is normal and intended because this is just a test. So that's why you've got the change here. All right, so now we're going to set up the comms. So the two things you'd want to do here is set up yeah, we've got that already full up, and selector here to both. You can, everything regarding here, the UHF preset, you're not, well, in real life, it's hard coded. It's the maintenance that actually codes that and puts that in the in that system. So everything here, which is a preset, will be hard coded. In Falcon, the good thing is that it's actually bound to the information you're putting in the data cartridge, if I'm not mistaken. So if you want to set something manual, you forgot to set anything here regarding tower, and you want to set things manual, and you can actually contact the tower through uniform. In this case, you would rotate that here to manual to actually pre-select here and set here the frequency that you would require to contact anyone on the ground, tower, ground, whatever. So there you go. It's basically, you can set that to the tower frequency if you need, and that depends on the SOP that you have with the well, whatever briefing you've received. If you're bound to communicate first start, or you wait for a Victor to be active, that's really something you need to brief or receive as a briefing from the flight lead or the package lead. All right, so before we start anyway, we might need, if we're at night, we might need, for example, to get some lights here. So you probably want to power on the lights where it's daylight right now, but it's part of the briefing. If you need that, don't forget to set up the console float, cockpit float, as you would need to in the backlights for the instruments, because you would need that to review what's happening in the cockpit. All right, so then you would require, so it's right now it's hidden just behind the armrest here. You've got the air source, so you need to pull up one step up from that selector here, just to have the air source to the norm position. And what it does is basically it will activate as soon as the engine start and the instruments are powered. It's going to start bleeding which is basically put air to cool down the instruments in the cockpit, because if you do not do that, you will actually overheat the instruments, and the instrument will fail for sure. All right, so now we're ready to start. There's not much we can do right now as we're on battery, and so what we'll do now is switch that to main power, and we'll be starting the engine. So what you want to do is get that lever here to start to position. If you've not already done the close the canopy, you should close it if you don't want to be annoyed by the sound. So what we'll do now, we monitor two things. We monitor right now the RPM and what's written here on the primary fault display. That's the primary fault display, and that's the fault display. All right, so as you can see right now, secondary mode for the engine has shut down. The light is not lit up anymore, and we've reached 20%, which means that now the engine is basically safe to start. And what we're going to do is inject fuel, put that 50%, and if you don't have the latch, you need to click here on the base of the throttle to latch the engine and make sure that there's kind of mechanical gate that you need to get so the engine actually starts. So here the engine will start, the hydraulic pressure will start power. Yeah, so we've got hydraulics. We've monitored also the temperature, and as you can see, it's right now at normal, we shouldn't be going over 700 here. It's usually around 600, 650, and it will stabilize here to 70% RPM. And the also the temperature here will stabilize a bit above 450 something. That will depend on the version of F16 you're using, and the and also linked to the engine itself. All right, so now we've done that. We'll be we'll be powering on all the. All right, let me turn down the lights. We don't need that for sure. All right, so now we'll be powering the instruments right now. All right, so as you can see there, we've powered everything up. You can see which switch is for what. That's described in the manual. I will not review that now. And put the avionics power to and the INS system to norm, and so the alignment process will start. So you can see now the MFDs are powering on, the DED is powering on, and the alignment process will start. That's essential, as we need the INS to be aligned. For one thing in particular is that you need that for your autopilot for sure, and for the entire instrument systems that is actually bound to the INS system, because it will refer to your plane position to give the, for example, target or steer point position from your current location, from what is actually pre-calculated. All right, so right now we see that the INS system is currently aligning. We have to wait a bit before it's actually active and will start flashing. All right, in theory, depends if you need to power on the arc points. The arc points is basically those things on the left and right of the air and the air entry for the engine. So you can power that on. Power on the FCR and put the radar altitude to standby. Don't put that to active before you're actually on the runway. All right, so now we've got a couple of things we need to power on. On top of that, so we're going to do a few tests. Let me power on the HUD now. That there are things you can actually do a bit different in terms of if it's by the book or not. And so what you would do now is two things. Either you start the test, or you can start the communication with the tower. And that's one thing you can actually do is preload. Once you've got the MFD ready here, is that if you got, for example, the DT here, you can load it. And for one good reason is that it will preset your everything you've set in the data cartridge is going to be loaded up right now when you do that. So you can actually, for example, what we're doing now is that we need to communicate with the ground or whatever the flight leads on Victor. So we'll switch that to to UFC here on the comms panel, and you would get with return here. You would get back to the main audio. So you get in the primary page for the DED, and you'll be able to select whatever Victor channel here. That's with the rocker switch here. You could select the VHF. If would advise you bound that to your keyboard keys or whatever, and you can change that with here the arrows here. You can change the value. All right, so now we've done that. We can actually continue or sweep, and go to the test panel right now. All right, so if we want to test everything, so we're going to test the probe heat, and you see it goes up here on the test panel. On the fault panel, it will flash just to make sure that it's actually working. In 433, the probe heat is not modeled from what I recall. Now we're doing the engine fire test. That's working just to test the lights. Actually, nothing is really really implemented, including for the oxygen quantity. That thing is not implemented in Falcon as per today.
Altitude. Warning. Jammer.
All right, now we've got the
flare. Low.
warning tests. The only thing you need to check here is that all lights actually lit up, and you've got everything, and you've got also the audio roll that actually gives all the warnings that you usually can have in the cockpit. All right, so now it's over. And we can also test the flight control channels. Actually, in Falcon, only one channel is simulated. There should be 4 in the real plane for the flight controls. And here, essentially, this is not simulated. There is only one channel, so there's not much of a difference. Before we move to something else, what I would advise here is that we'll do the EPU test a bit later on here on the test panel. We can start the bid test. So what does the bid test do is basically that will take the flight controls of your aircraft, move the surfaces of your plane, and the ground crew will actually monitor that. That's a sequence that is actually always the same, and the ground crew will actually check that all the surfaces are moving in the proper way and to the proper position, just to make sure there's nothing broken or missing or whatever in the plane. As you can see, that should be over soon, and when it's over, there we go, it should be over now. And once it's over, here, the switch here, magnetically, there's a magnet here that will release the switch here, so it can actually go back to off. And if it fails, it will actually show here fail, or if it succeeded, you will have a black screen here showing nothing, which is the case here. So the test actually succeeded. All right, so now we've done that. We're going to test the engine, and one thing we're going to test is that you have to maintain the EPU gen here. So we're going to test the EPU. So the EPU is basically an emergency power unit that powers the plane. Well, powers only one bus of the plane. Well, it has is going to power on the essential instruments of the plane if you're encountering any main generator issue, or the engine has a problem and you're not able to restart it. The EPU is there to help you on that. There's 2 things. The EPU is either air driven or it will be hydrogen driven. If it's air driven, it will actually use the airflow inside the engine to power on a turbine that is actually turning with the wind. And as long as you maintain the proper airflow, it will maintain and give a proper it will give the essential power that your plane requires to continue operating it, actually. So what we're going to do here is make sure that it's going to test the airflow system, and so we have to turn that to 80%. So we're going to set that power and increase the throttle to 80%. Once it's at 80, you should see the green light and air. So what it says is basically here it will say air and green light, meaning that it's working and is currently driven by air. There we go. And it will release the switch. And you also see that there were your indications. So yeah, and the other way to power on the EPU if the airflow is not enough is the hydrazine stock. It's a limited hydrazine stock, so make sure that you always monitor behind the stick here. I'm not with the track error, so I cannot really show you. But behind the stick here, you'll have the current hydrazine EPU fuel, so the hydrazine stock that you have in the plane, and monitoring constantly, because you have something, so depending on the altitude, you'll have something like 10-15 minutes of operation with that. So and it will continuously switch between air and hydrazine depending on the current state and the current speed and airflow inside the engine. So monitor always that if you're in emergency. Don't forget that you have limited stock. It's not going to power on for a long time anyway. All right, so let's continue here. What you can do here is reset the trim, disconnect, and put it back to norm, and making sure the needles here are straight and vertical, and the yacht trim is actually also horizontal here. All right, so now we've done with the we've done that with everything with the when it comes to the test systems. We're going to continue our sweep here and making sure we power on the other systems. So the the next thing will be powering on is the TWA, so the threat warning auxiliary panel here, and it will actually lit up the radar warning system. It should, don't forget to actually set up here, depends if it's working or not. You should always test the system before you actually use it in the air. And don't forget to set up here the end off. Alright, so that should be, test should be over soon. End off is now active, and test it. Always test it. Because it's actually, there's failures implemented if needed. There's something was really bad. Alright, well, we'll see. Let's continue now. We're going to power on the electronic warfare panel. So those two are not implemented actually. But those are chaff and flares. Put that to standby. You don't want to actually touch the CMS and pop flare and shafts on the ground. That's something that will be disastrous for your plane and the ground crew. You can set up the ECM knob here if you need to. For now, we don't have an ECM loaded up in the plane, so that's why it's showing it here auto degraded. That's normal. All right, so now we've already powered up the HUD. We'll continue to sweep. And test a few other things. We'll test the fuel here, making sure that we've got the two needles here back to 6,000. So here, vertical needles, and the quantity should be showing up 6,000. There we go, back to normal. Before we continue, we'll be now clearing out the faults. So we're going to back to the test panel, and you can clear out the emergencies here, and clear out the master corrosion. That should clear up the fault panel, and you can do also that by acknowledging the faults with FAC here. That's one thing, and you can now go to and set up the radar, and making sure that the radar is now active on the ground. As long as you have a weights on wheel, there's a weight on wheel system that will actually prevent the radar from being powered on. As long as you're on the ground, it will power up as soon as you take off. All right, so as you can see here now, we've powered up the HUD. We can actually go to the to list, and now to the INS system. Sorry, key number 6. It's now flashing ready, And as soon as it's flashing ready, it means that the INS system is actually aligned now, and we can set that to navigation. And now the system is fully ready and fully operational and lined up and you've got the precision level here and your current GPS position. I would recommend, if you're monitoring your ground speed, to maintain that page active before you actually contact the tower or anything. Go back to that page if you want to monitor your ground speed, because that will be the ground speed given by the GPS. So that's always interesting to get that, because you will not have an indication as long as you don't go over 50 knots when it comes to the air indication here. All right, so whatever you do, always make sure that you now have the information when it comes to the tower. It's always essential to get the information when it comes to tower with the barometer, for example. What we're going to do here is get back to the tower, and if we're on the right frequency, I'm not sure we are actually, but you could request the few parameters like Q and H.
Goblin 2, main post 2984.
All right, so 2984. So you would set that here and making sure. So we're almost at sea level. So that's why we have here the needle that close to the zero level. There are a couple of things that I would recommend to check, such as the Q and H, the wind check, and takeoff runway. So if we check now the takeoff runway.
Goblin 21, main post runway 02 right for takeoff.
All right, so 2 right. And wind check.
Goblin 21, main post 320 at 14 knots.
All right, there you go. All right, so we've powered up all the main systems from the plane. There are a few things that you could set as per your wish, such as here on that panel. Check the manual if you need regarding that. When it comes to the ejection seat arm system, it's totally up to you, and totally up to if you're part of a squadron of a wing. That's part of the SOP. That's something you would probably arm just before you enter the runway, so you can actually eject if engine failures shows up. When you're ready, don't forget to make sure the lights are working. And now it's flashing. If you're ready, pop up the taxi lights, landing lights, the same knob, and put up your parking brake and cool off for the chokes. And if you go at external view, you'll see that the chokes has been removed. Have been removed now, and you're ready to go. So if you had to get information regarding what's the current airfield situation and where you need to go in terms of runway, as you can recall, the runway active runway is 02, so that will be here. Close to the 3 here, so it'll be just here. Means that if we want to depart 02, we are currently facing almost west, and it means that we'll have to go south, and then we can depart on 02. So it means that in terms of taxi, I would turn left right now, go to the end of the runway, go on the holding point, request takeoff, and then what you would do is actually, before you take off, a couple of things you need to do is that when you're before entering the runway, a few things you need to check. First thing is that probe heat needs to be set up, and you need to activate the probe heat here. Then second thing, anti-collision needs to be activated. That's part also of the SOP, depending on your squadron. Some will do before, some will wait for the runway, and that's it. You would also get that ejection seat armed for sure. Some would actually activate when taking off the electronic warfare system. I would personally not recommend to do that. That's usually part of the fence-in procedure. And the rest is up to you, whatever you want to set. So that's about it for the rem start. You're good to go. There are a couple things probably you would need to set in the deity, but as part of another briefing that we'll do anyway. Until then, I hope that that explains a lot of information and that gives you proper understanding on how to do the rem start correctly. Until then, practice that section a lot so you can be efficient in the way that you roll up the rem start. And until next time, enjoy flights and make sure you review the next lesson and take the quiz for to make sure that you understood everything that was said in that lesson. Thank you for watching and see you in the next lesson.